Hi, I'm Massad Ayoob here for the Wilson Combat Channel. I'd like to urge you to subscribe to the Wilson Combat Channel. They have a treasure trove of good information. While you're at it, hit that little bell for notification that'll tell you when the next knowledge bomb drops. And finally, when you go down into descriptions, you'll find a link where you can sign up for the Wilson Combat newsletter. What I've been asked to address today is a fairly recent controversy: necessary force versus reasonable force. Last year in California, the anti-police mentality reached a level where they decided they were going to legislatively change the standard to which police were held in the use of physical force. Historically, it's always been reasonable force. For the private citizen in self-defense, it's the ancient reasonable man doctrine from the English common law. And it asks a three-pronged question: what would a reasonable, prudent person have done in the exact same situation, knowing what the defendant knew? For police, it's actually very similar. The guiding decision in police use of force came from the United States Supreme Court in 1989 in the decision in Graham versus Connor. Now, a whole lot of folks have accepted the misrepresentation from social justice warriors that this decision gave magical powers to the police, that they could kill anybody they wanted and just say, well, I was in fear. And folks, that's as BS as the stuff they give you on Stand Your Ground for private citizens in self-defense. What the Graham versus Connor standard did was establish that the benchmark is objective reasonableness. And essentially, it's little more than the reasonable man doctrine applied to law enforcement. It asks, what would the reasonable, prudent, trained, and experienced police officer have done in exactly the same situation, knowing what that officer knew at the time? And remember, that knowledge encompasses not just the instant facts and the minutes and seconds before force was applied, but it can go all the way back to the officer's training and why the officer may have recognized a certain behavior indicator, a certain cue that they were about to come under attack, prepared for it, and were thus able to survive, but had to injure or even kill the offender to do so. What is necessary force? Well, it means that afterwards, if we find out, gee, his knife was rubber instead of steel, and in the dark the officer made a mistake, well, rubber knife isn't going to kill you, so it wasn't really necessary. Therefore, even though you genuinely believed that this man was going to kill you, and to all appearances he was trying to, you were wrong to have shot him. Report to the state penitentiary. And that, my brothers and sisters, is not logical. Go back to the Graham versus Connor decision, which it would be very much worth your time to read. You'll find it online. It makes it clear the Supreme Court, the arbiter of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, said clearly, we must not apply 20/20 hindsight to these incidents. These are tense and rapidly evolving circumstances, and the judgment and the actions of the accused must be judged within that light. So what's happening in California? We're glad you asked. From USA Today, August 20th of 2019, I quote, "In legal terms, the new standard California has adopted to regulate police use of force is not that different from the old one." The hell it isn't. Continuing the quote, AB 392, the bill signed into law Monday by Governor Gavin Newsom, will become effective January 1 and will modify the conditions under which a police officer can legally use deadly force from times when it's reasonable, their quotes, to times when it's necessary, also their quotes. Well, just how subjective is that going to be? Again, a quote, "It's going to depend almost entirely on how the law is interpreted, first by prosecutors, then by judges, then by juries," said Robert Weisberg, law professor and faculty co-director of the Criminal Justice Center at Stanford University. Certainly by its terms, it moves the law in the direction of making it more feasible to prosecute officers for homicide. Okay. And if you're sitting there thinking, well, I'm really glad I don't live there. Governor Newsom said, I quote, "As California goes, so goes the rest of the United States of America. And we're doing something today that stretches the boundaries of possibility and sends a message to people all across the country that they can do more," close quote. Yeah, it stretches the boundaries of reality, the boundaries of logic, and the boundaries of justice. Historically, what this means, let's say the guy is, let's take it to a logical extreme. The bad guy, the suspect, has pointed a gun at you, screamed, "SOB, I'll kill you." You shot him. And in the cold light of tomorrow at the crime lab, they find out his gun had a broken firing pin. Well, his gun couldn't have fired. It couldn't have shot the officer. Therefore, killing him, it turns out, wasn't really necessary. And the officer is prosecuted for what you or I or anyone in his position would have done. You'll hear a lot of people say that, well, he only had a knife. And whenever I hear that, I want to reach for a barf bag. If you think about it, a scalpel with a blade this long is what they use to dissect us after we're dead. Okay, you can literally dismember people with it. If you look in the classic textbook, Medico-Legal Investigation of Death by Dr. Werner Spitz, you'll see a picture of a victim who was dismembered into probably 4 or 5 pieces with a knife about 3 inches long. This is 3 7/8. If you look at a 4-inch blade knife, you have to realize it can penetrate about 8 inches into the human body. Reach down, feel your abdomen. Soft tissue compresses, particularly in the point of a blade. Any place you can take a pulse, you only have to cut that deep, and you have arterial hemorrhage that in a very short period of time is going to result in death by exsanguination. There's a video out there from another country of multiple officers who tried to follow the paradigm of he only had a knife. As they attempt to disarm this knife-wielding maniac, he slashed several of them, killing more than one, until finally someone had the presence of mind to shoot him. The law recognizes the knife, the raised bludgeon, within its range can be every bit as deadly as a firearm. And we need to take that into account as well. It's a myth that I've come to call hierarchy of lethality. The public's belief that the gun is up here, it's the nuclear grade of handheld weapons, and the knife is down here. Yeah, we know you can stab somebody with it, but I cut my steak with one every night, I open my mail every morning with something that looks like that. And they simply don't realize the tremendous lethality of those weapons. The knife and the club never run out of ammunition. The knife and the club never jam. The knife in particular comes with a built-in silencer, and there's no law against any felon in the country walking into any number of different types of stores and buying a knife or something that would serve as a bludgeon. These things sometimes need expert testimony to clear up for the courts. I think the American Police Service needs to educate the public, not only so they more fairly judge the police when they use force, but so those citizens realize the danger they face when they become the victim of the criminal who wields such a weapon against them. And don't sit there and say, well, I'm not a cop, it doesn't matter to me. Because that precedent is a precedent on use of force. If they hold the cops to that standard, do you doubt that very soon they'll hold you, the honest private citizen, to that standard? This can go bad in a lot of ways. We've seen the narratives that are developed by angry, vengeful families of people who violently attack police and were forced to shoot them. And we have seen the same with armed citizens who fired in self-defense. The same applications need to be taken into context here. It's always been what would a reasonable, prudent person have done in the same situation, knowing what the accused knew. If we change that, there will be no such thing as justified self-defense in a great many cases. We have constantly the suicide by cop, the person who takes a realistic-looking air gun, points it at the police, and gets shot. Was that the officer's fault? Any reasonable, prudent person in that officer's situation would have done exactly the same. The example I give, and I've actually given in court, is that we all know common sense. It waddles like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it has webbed feet and bill and feathers like a duck. It's reasonable and logical to conclude you're dealing with a duck. And if it was foolish enough, crazy enough, or suicidal enough to impersonate a duck during duck season, it has come to its unfortunate end through its own misadventure and through no fault of the person it literally tricked into killing them. These things apparently were not taken into consideration there. The legislature apparently buckled to the defund the police, the anti-police forces. Well, let's talk about some of the people in that political sector. One of the most notable is Alyssa Milano. And we have here from the Daily Wire, September 22nd, 2020. The headline is, "Defund the Police activist Alyssa Milano triggers massive law enforcement response over gun threat." Well, that sounds pretty scary. Until it continues, actress Alyssa Milano, who recently became a top supporter of the Defund the Police movement, which seeks to disband police departments and redirect funds to community organizations, was quick to call the cops, the Daily Mail reports, over reports of an armed gunman, their quote, in the neighborhood. Fortunately, no one was hurt. The armed gunman turned out to be a teenager targeting squirrels with an air gun, according to the outlet. He turned himself in to authorities after realizing he had caused the problem. Milano, who recently tweeted to defund the police and asked her social media followers to sign onto a petition that demands a 90% reduction in police funding in the Los Angeles city budget, triggered what neighbors told the Mail was a massive police presence after calling 911 to report gunshots on Sunday. We quote, "Alyssa and her talent agent husband had dialed 911 when they heard what they believed to be gunshots on their 1.39-acre property," the Daily Mail reported. They allegedly told the emergency hotline the sound scared their dogs and made them feel like a gunman was nearby. A description was given to the officers of someone who was male, 40 years old, with a long rifle. They triggered a response that included 7 Ventura County Sheriff's vehicles, 1 K-9 unit, a police helicopter, and 1 Los Angeles Fire Department team that sat down the street on standby. The magnitude of the hypocrisy of the gun banners, who tend to be the very same ones who want to defund or even eliminate the police, is simply mind-boggling. Ask yourselves if this is logic. Ask yourselves if this is justice. Sometimes mistakes get made. According to the Department of Justice, in any given year, there will be well over 50 million contacts of American law enforcement officers with individual citizens. A very, very few of them end up in mistaken identity shootings or situations where any reasonable person would have believed they were under deadly attack and used the force that the officer used. Sometimes, because of the way the narratives are drawn, it's innocent, sweet, lovable angel slain by bloodthirsty pigs. And you know, not all of these are malicious. Not all of these are motivated by greed or lust for political power. Very often, there are a great many criminals out there who hide their violent activities from the people who most love them. You know, think back as you watch this, when you were a teenage kid. Did you ever do some stuff that you went to great lengths to keep your parents from finding out about? And the same thing is true of these. Many of the parents, brothers and sisters, genuinely believe that poor deceased Sonny was a sweet angel, when in fact, poor sweet Sonny turned into a demon when he attacked the police, or when he attacked an armed citizen who was able to fight back and kill him. We see it again and again, and I've come to think of it as the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde syndrome. In the 1880s, Robert Louis Stevenson wrote that novel, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Many movies have been made about it, and even a play. Dr. Jekyll is the kindly gentleman, the healer of the sick, who treats the poor for free. But for whatever reason, he experiments with drugs that unleash his dark side and turn him into Mr. Hyde. Mr. Hyde is a beast who brutalizes children, murders the innocent, and ultimately one day forces one of Dr. Jekyll's friends, a decent man, to kill him. And at the end of the novel, at the end of the story, after that decent person has killed the evil Mr. Hyde turns back into kindly Dr. Jekyll. We see that again and again. The multi-time offender, drug abuser, attacker of police, or attacker of innocent armed citizens forces their intended victim to kill them, and when they pass, they are seen as kindly Dr. Jekyll again. Don't fall for that. Robert Louis Stevenson knew in his fiction that paralleled so much reality back in the 19th century that it was Dr. Jekyll who voluntarily consumed the serum that turned him into Mr. Hyde, and the death of Mr. Hyde was, in the end, the fault of Dr. Jekyll himself. Bear that in mind when you see this sort of thing. Please understand that if the concept of necessary force versus reasonable force, the bad guy's firing pin turned out to be broken, so you're killing him when he aimed the gun at you and screamed a death threat, wasn't really necessary. Ask yourself, is that justice? Ask yourself, is that fairness? Ask yourself if that should be the standard in American jurisprudence. If anyone puts forth legislation like that where you live, please stand up and speak against it, because the next victim of that, whether you're a cop or an armed citizen, may be you. Good luck. Stay safe out there.